everyone. I was making a skull the other day, interestingly from a CRT scan, which I've never done before, and I was concentrating quite a bit, making sure it was right, and I forgot myself and let the filament go, and unfortunately it went through the blades on the fan and busted it. It was the fan that sits on the hot end here. Problem is, it still works, which is great. Unfortunately, the noise is pretty much unbearable when you're doing your prints, and if I spend a lot of time there sort of watching a print or overseeing a print, I can't take the noise is absolutely awful. So unfortunately the fan still works, but the noise is just, you know, if I just hook up to this battery, don't sound too bad there, but when it's actually sitting on a shroud somewhere, the vibration through the whole machine gets quite loud, especially when you can hear it near, you know, and it could have an effect on your final print as well, because the less vibration, as we all know, the better. So I'm not fantastic at soldering, and I thought, you know, how can I get around this without stripping the whole thing off, resoldering it all and everything else. So all I've done is bought myself a new fan, only a few quid on Amazon, put that inside, and I fitted some black and some red heat shrinks, and twisted the two wires together for each, you know, obviously the red and the black. And then all you need to do, this is probably the most tricky bit, is getting the sleeve back over the small wire you've twisted together. But once you've done it, it's fine. And then what you do is you heat shrink it together. So I'm going to cut the film there, come back, and I'll show you it heat shrink together. So as you can see, I've put the two wires together inside, twisted them together nicely, and the sleeves fit over the actual twist of the wire right nicely. That sits inside the sleeve. And now to heat it up, what I would say is what you want is something sitting behind it, because the heat generated off these small heat guns are quite substantial. So the last thing you want is any other components being damaged while you're doing it. Well, as you can see, I've now put the twisted cables, I've now put the heat shrink over the top of each cable. And what I'm going to do is show you how to heat shrink, heat wrap it, or whatever you like to call it, on that actual particular wire. I mean, it's not ideal, I've got wood here, and heat don't always mix, but I prefer to, you know, brown this wood slightly instead of doing any of the components or the tubing underneath it. So you've got to be fairly careful with where you do it. That is the only tip I would say. So just make sure there's nothing else really in the way. And where it will go. And you'll see as it moves along, that ain't gonna go nowhere. So once it's wrapped round, what I'll do is probably spin it round and just do the back of it as well, just so it's mega tight on it. But as you can see, it's actually pulled it together quite nicely. So what I'm going to do is obviously do the red. Get that one done now, and that should wrap around that quite nicely. See, it's tightening it up now. So it's not mega hot. It's like a hairdryer, but just slightly more industrial. But if you keep it on something for a long time, then it will burn, obviously. just make sure you've shrinked it all the way around the cable. You'll see what I mean. Some bits just don't go around it that well, that tight. So just do it again. Just make sure you've got all the way around the cable. It's hard to hold at the same time, but my setup's not exactly perfect here, but it does the job. And that's actually not a bad finish. The cables are together, they're nice and tight. What I would say is when you put the fan back on, just make sure that when you put it on correctly, and you put it out the way of the hot end. Just pin it up here, put a bit of black tape around it or something along those lines, and then they're out the way completely. It's not the neatest job in the world, but if you're not any good at soldering, like me, I'm awful at soldering, then this is a good way of doing it. All right, let's show you it with the power on. So with the heat shrink all in place, all I've got to do is obviously put this cover back on. There you go. Just make sure that's nice and tight and there's no cables caught behind it or anything like that at all, because obviously that'll have a massive effect if you've got a cable caught there, and it will start heating up and just break the cable. And just make sure they're all nice and tight. Yeah, it's nice and tight. And what we'll do is we'll fire her up and see what it sounds like. I mean, it was unbearable, the noise before. Obviously, all I've got left to do, I'm just going to take this piece of tape off, tidy this piece of cable up, and just strap it up a little bit, and obviously pull the slack through. And let's see what the difference is in noise. Fingers crossed this powers up. And there you go. Compared to before, I mean, that was unbelievable. It was almost like having a washing machine next to you. The noise was terrible. That's really, really silent. I'm really pleased with that. Obviously, as I said, I'm going to tidy these cables up, and all it was a heat shrink over the top of 2 wires twisted together. I wouldn't recommend it on the high voltage, anything, you know, that's a fair amount of power, like stuff inside the box or whatever it is. But something like a 12 volt fan, you know, to be honest, there's not a lot of power going to it. Just make sure you get a nice clean twist on the wires, and then do your heat shrink over the top. If I zoom out a minute, let's have a look, and I'll show you what the this is just a normal hot air gun. There you go, that's all it is. It's really, really tiny, like a yeah, just like a hairdryer, if you like. It's a bit of an obvious message there, but nozzle may be hot. Well, I hope so, because you'd have to take it back if it's not working. All you need is that and a couple of heat sleeves. As I said, I'll show you again what they're like. They come in all shapes and sizes depending on the thickness of the wire, and they pretty much go on like that. You slip it over your twisted cables, heat it up. Obviously, when you use the smaller ones, you heat them up and they just contract all the way in, and then they'll tighten up, and then you get your cable like that. Alright, I hope this has helped a few people anyway, because this is the first time I've changed the fan on a CR10s. I mean, the old favourite, the ANET A8, you could pretty much get to everything really quickly and easily. But when you've got the box like that, you've got all the nicely sort of sleeved cables. I didn't really want to take everything apart just to change a small fan. So I thought the ideal thing was to cut the cables on the fan, cut the cables on the existing fan, put the two together, and away you go. Discard the old fan, and you've got a nice, smooth, clean, silent running printer. I hope this helps a few of you. Cheers.